So you're thinking about making a move from Brooklyn to Long Island. These are the things that you need to understand before you make that move. And I say this because the transition is way bigger than a lot of people expect. A lot of Brooklyn buyers think that they're just upgrading from an apartment to a house, but really, you're changing your entire lifestyle. And I see this with a lot of people who are moving from Brooklyn to Long Island. They tend to get excited about having more space, maybe a backyard, maybe finally getting out of that parking nightmare. But then they move out to Long Island and realize there are certain things nobody really prepared them for. So in today's video, I want to talk about some of those real differences between living in Brooklyn and living on Long Island, the good, the bad, and the things people usually don't realize until after they've made the move. The first thing you're going to notice immediately is Long Island is much more car dependent. Okay, you better have a car. And honestly, this is probably the biggest adjustment for Brooklyn buyers. And Brooklyn, depending on where you live, you can walk to almost everything. You can walk to coffee shops, restaurants, grocery stores, gyms, the trains. But on Long Island, you're going to find yourself driving for most things. Even simple errands become little trips. And for people who are used to walking everywhere, that convenience, that's an adjustment that can feel very strange at first, especially if you spent years barely using your car in Brooklyn or not even having one. So on the flip side, one thing Brooklyn buyers love once they move to Long Island is parking, right? Because if you spent years circling blocks for 5 hours at 3 o'clock in the morning in Brooklyn trying to find parking, finally having your own driveway is going to feel life-changing. That's usually one of the first things people say after moving. Another huge adjustment is going to be pace. Brooklyn has energy, right? There's always movement. There's always restaurants open, restaurants open late, people outside, things are happening constantly. And Long Island is a lot quieter, right? It's not dead necessarily. It's just, it's just a lot quieter. And people, they react to that very differently, right? Depending on how you are, right? Some buyers immediately feel relieved. Others almost feel bored at first, especially people coming from neighborhoods like Williamsburg, Park Slope, or you're coming from downtown Brooklyn where there's always something going on. Long Island is going to be more spread out and it's going to be more suburban. And that's either going to feel peaceful or it's going to feel very different. Another thing that surprises Brooklyn buyers is how different Long Island towns feel from one another. This is one of the biggest, I think, things people don't really see coming. They think Long Island is just one big suburban area, but it's really not, right? Each town has its own flavor. Huntington feels different from Massapequa. Patchogue is going to feel different from Paw Paw. North Shore feels different from the South Shore. Some areas still feel very active and connected, and others feel much quieter and much more residential. And honestly, I think, if you pick the wrong town for your personality, you're probably not going to enjoy the move nearly as much. And that's why I always advise clients that I work with and people in general, just don't buy the house, buy the lifestyle. Another thing that buyers coming from Brooklyn, I feel like don't really pay attention to is that a lot of people move to Long Island while still working in the city. And in theory, the commute sounds like it's going to be manageable at first, but the reality eventually starts to kick in. At the Long Island Railroad, it becomes part of your daily routine. And that could be pricey, right? You got to factor in that price. How much does it cost? And depending on where you move, that commute can absolutely wear people down over time, especially buyers who move too far east without fully thinking about the day-to-day impact. Something else that I want to talk about that a lot of people really don't talk about is the cost difference. Isn't always what people really expect. A lot of Brooklyn buyers assume that Long Island is automatically going to be cheaper, and that's not necessarily always true. Yes, you usually get significantly more space, but now you also have property taxes, you have you got maintenance, you got utilities, you got landscapers you got to pay for, you got repairs. Owning a house is a whole different show, right? You know, it's a completely different type of expense than having an apartment, right? So there's a reason so many Brooklyn buyers still make the move. For a lot of people, I think it really comes down to the extra space. You know, that's something that completely can change your quality of life. You know, suddenly you look up and you got storage, you got a nice backyard, you got multiple bedrooms, you got some privacy, you got a driveway. And once people get used to having those things, it's hard to imagine going backwards, right? Another thing people end up appreciating is having more breathing room overall. You know, life starts feeling a little bit less chaotic. You know, and honestly, for a lot of buyers, that's exactly what they're looking for without even fully realizing it, right? Now, obviously, everybody adjusts differently, right? Not everybody adjusts perfectly. Some people genuinely miss Brooklyn. You know, they miss the walkability. They miss the spontaneous life. They miss the energy. And honestly, there's nothing wrong with that, right? It's just your preference. But a lot of buyers eventually realize that they were ready for a different phase of life. You know, they're ready for more space. They're ready for a different type of pace. They're ready for a new routine. They're ready for a different environment. You know, and that's where a place like Long Island can really start making sense for that type of person. So, you know, moving from Brooklyn to Long Island is less about leaving the city, and it's really just more about deciding, you know, what are you looking for out of life? That's going to be the real decision that you've got to make. So if you want me to help you out with making that decision, you're thinking about making that move from Brooklyn to Long Island, or you're thinking about moving to Long Island, feel more than free to reach out to me. All my information is down below. I'd be happy to help you out. And thanks for checking out the video. I look forward to seeing you all in my next one, and I hope you all have a fantastic